All right, so here's an example of getting smooth video, non-wobbly, shaky, jittery video, right? So I had bought these tires for this guy. I saw some videos of people using these tires and they seem pretty badass. The Red Cat Racing Kaiju tires, right? So it's hard to I mean, they're quite a bit bigger. They're thicker. These actually work out pretty good. Bashing around doing off-roading. The problem is there was no way that I could get all four of these on here and get a smooth ride for FPV, right? So that's the thing about it. These tires are just far too unbalanced, let's just say. Whereas these that came with it, they're actually not bad. These Ragnarok tires, D Boots, apparently that it's a pretty good brand. You want them to be spinning nicely, so I actually got super lucky when I first balanced these tires. It only took me like 20 minutes. I'm kind of shifting the hexes and the wheels around, and I was just looking for the best rotation on every tire. And within like 20 minutes, I landed on four just random orientations that were like perfect. I almost couldn't believe it. And when I took it out to start driving it around, I also couldn't believe that it was just naturally tracking straight. And I didn't have to make any adjustments or anything. Even when I would full throttle it, it would stay pretty damn straight. It might want to sort of turn left or right just a tiny little bit as soon as I throttle it, but it was real easy to adjust it after that, right? After going to the bigger tires, not liking those and switching back, I have to now rebalance them, right? So my first effort of doing that kind of worked out to where the ride is fairly smooth, maybe not as smooth as I had it, but it's definitely not tracking perfectly straight like it was. It's not a huge difference, but it's just not going straight. The other thing is I was limiting the throttle at 85%, so the tires would never all the way quite balloon out like they possibly could. Now that I'm at allowing full throttle, when they balloon out, you gotta imagine they gotta be pretty damn well balanced to keep tracking straight while these things are ballooning out, right? As far as rotating, if I can just kind of show, like, so obviously, you don't want too much wobble in the tire. So I'm just pretending like just any arbitrary straight line across this wheel here is gonna be ground. And I wanna see that the wheel is not really shifting too much above or beyond that line, right? That imaginary line. So you got sort of a complex interaction here of how this wheel is going to fit on this wheel hex. The hex itself has got a grub screw on it. Just the way that's going to go on there on that shaft and the overall way this is going to tighten down, it's never going to be identical anytime you put it on, right? It's only going to be in a exact specific way you put every one of these pieces on that it's going to spin in exact perfect way. So let's just say if I was to take this nut off, put the wheel back on the hex, but just by turning it one side over to where it's not quite exactly on the same way it was before, well, the tires might not rotate exactly the same. It's going to look a little bit different. So if I look back over here to this tire, see, this one's still got wobble in it. I need to do something about that. It's got a little bit of a side-to-side wobble, which might not be too big of a deal as far as shaky video. But you can kind of imagine what that might do on the ground. Right? Now, as far as the center of that tire, where most of the weight is going to be placed on that tire, it's really not deviating too much as far as rotation, but there is that wobble in it. Right? Likewise, I can come look at this tire. You see that tiny little bit of wobble in there, that's going to be noticeable when you're driving. So when this truck was driving the smoothest and just the straightest to me at full throttle, that's when every single one of these tires were almost perfect. Like none of them had any of this wobble in it. So when I had just randomly thrown all four of these tires on first, then all of them had a real bad wobble, let's just say, right? So I had to play around with them until I got it down to the point where only like a couple of them had a little bit of wobble. So again, that drives fine. It's just it's not as good as it could be. So the other thing, obviously, outside of suspension, suspension is going to be a big part of it. But let's just say you're just riding on flat road, the road that's supposed to be fairly flat. It's going to be the servo gimbal itself, this whole assembly, that's going to be a problem. This one, I've basically modified to where it's got a whole little support system here, right? I like using these heavier duty ones in these metal frames here because those are just more overall durable, right? I can mount the camera inside just a little hood here, and that sort of gives it some protection. You know, I've flipped and rolled these quite a few times now. The only thing that's really been in danger is the actual lens of the O3 there. And whatever I might have on top here at the time is just a random analog. I'm not too worried about that. But what'll tend to happen is, since this whole interaction here on this axis is only attached via this one little shaft down here, that's the weak point, right? So I've got all this weight up here that's going to shift around, and then it's all going to have that one little shaft down there flex around a little bit, right? And over time, it's going to flex more and more, and eventually you're going to have too much wiggle in it. Even just brand new, it's going to have a tiny little bit of flex and play in it, right? So what's naturally going to happen is you're going to have this little bit of flex, which I have to put a good deal of force on here to make that happen now because of how I've got it supported. And you're also going to have the flex on this axis. I can't even really do it, right? Because I've got it fixed. So aside from that, you're going to have the possible flexing of how that shaft is not trying to move, how it wasn't designed to move, right? So left to right like this, or forward to back like this from the whole thing. But as you can see, it's not trying to flex, right? And that's just because obviously I've jammed some stuff down there with the perfect sizes. These are actually potentiometer knobs. I've just kind of jammed them all in there to where they're not allowing this particular servo to flex to any degree beyond where that shaft wants it to. So it's only going to turn in the directions that it's supposed to. And again, you know, you're adding some friction to the motion here, but you know, these servos have no problem battling through that, right? Especially these larger ones. The smaller, cheaper ones have much quicker movement. They zip around much better. Might be more ideal for camera stuff, right? But they're also so much weaker. Even the metal geared ones. Like this guy down here, I got him in a bag. I was kind of playing around with it earlier. This is just some cheap servos that I've had for a while. I switched to metal gear ones using this deal. You know, it's a real ugly, dirty deal with hot glue on it. But what happens is, you know, over time it gets this play in it, right? In this situation, I'm just constantly just jamming stuff. Like right here, I've got this stiff foam kind of deal, right? So it's just jammed in there. I've got like a zip tie to fill the gap, just to help keep it from wiggling too much on its own. And by kind of adding that little bit of, I guess you could say like a spring-loaded force against it, I don't know, it has it running much nicer than it normally would, let me put it that way. Without doing that, it's going to jiggle around way too much. Even this weak little servo setup, for some reason it survived from flipping this thing a few times. So then like this one, this is the guinea pig rig now. It's got the same type of metal deal. I'll say this servo that I've got on here, this particular one, that one does not want to develop play. All right, so I've got a different one down here on the bottom, and that one does have play in it. Those are just always get play over time. This one right here, which is a little more expensive, seems much more durable. It's solid, so two of those would probably be the best idea as a foundation. But so you can see over time, this is one where I've just sort of not really tended to it too much. It's got this little bit of wiggle in it, and I can kind of wiggle it side to side. You know, it's not the easiest thing to do, but you got to imagine what kind of vibration from driving is going to be enough to jiggle it around like that while you're driving, right? So I actually put a little baby Yoda on top of this guy, just, you know, screwing around. And that little bit of extra weight on there, I could really see it when I was driving. Like I could really see how that was just slightly jiggling the gimbal around. So I took it off. Now when it comes to a car of this size, this has just got the body off. I mean, the suspension on here is not terrible. You know, this was sort of built around a certain type of suspension for a certain type of driving. These aren't the actual factory wheels. These are much bigger than the wheels that it came with. That kind of suspension, I mean, it's not soft enough to give you really smooth video, right? The suspension is good for what it's supposed to be doing. If I want to haul ass and, you know, kind of have pretty good control, then that's what that suspension is good for. But when I start riding over grass, any kind of off-road, it's just bouncing around the whole time. So combined with the fact that this gimbal here is not the sturdiest, it's probably fine if the suspension is good because it's not super easy to shake all around. I mean it kind of is, right? Like that right there is a problem. But what I can do is actually add something else on here, just jammed in between that gap there, that's going to keep it from flexing, and it's going to be totally fine. But until I change this particular suspension up, it's just going to look horrible, right? There's going to be a whole lot of wobble, and that's what I see whenever I'm driving this thing. But I don't really want to change the suspension up so much to make it too soft. It can be done, but relative to that much bigger big rock, you know, I mean, it just doesn't have the weight on it to work with this kind of suspension to give real smooth video. And then because I've got an extra channel still to play with on one of the cars, I need to figure out what to do with that. So that's where I was going to add the horn, which is just going to be a sound effect player. So yeah, I found out that this little deal here works pretty good. And it looks like it's taking 2 coin cells, you know, so you could feed it about 6 volts. So you could basically power this by the voltage coming off of the BEC. And then just use a channel to in place of this little guy.